let's be realistic. Toxic cultures has always existed. We cannot say that the number of toxic behaviors in organizations have increased or not, but the real change is on how people feel about it. I'm thinking about my personal life. So 20 years ago, you would hear some disrespectful jokes and you would say, yeah, that's how the guys have fun. Or you would be a little bit bullied and you say, yes, that's how you build character. Especially bosses would say that. Today, we really feel bad, excluded, and we simply know that these behaviors are not right. I have many questions about where this thing about toxic cultures is going. What's the future like for these damn toxic cultures? And I have invited a monument of HR and future of work and culture. So today, my guest is Ira Wolfe. He is the #1 global thought leader on future of work and top 10 for HR. He's one of the HR's most visionary thinkers in managing the convergence of the tire, the wire, and technology. Ira is a TEDx speaker and chief Googlization officer of Poised for the Future company. He's also the host of Geeks Geezers Googlization podcast. And by the way, I highly recommend that podcast. It is a podcast about changing the way people talk about the future of work. And he's also an author, and we are going to be discussing a little bit more about the type of books that he writes. Ira, welcome today for this episode. I'm so glad and impressed, and I mentioned to you just before we started about hosting you today. According to you, what would be the reasons that businesses would get an F for their work culture?
Well, thanks very much, Ivan, and I really appreciate being here and for the kind introduction. I think we just have a limited amount of time, but the list for the reasons why companies have a toxic culture is it's endless, it's infinite, and unfortunately, as much as the pandemic created an opportunity for organizations to reevaluate where they were. It seems the news each day of companies figuring out how to make it worse, how to trip over their own feet, how to turn away employees, it's just mind-boggling. And in that same tone, it creates an opportunity because there are some companies that are really embracing it, really looking for the ways to create meaningful work, help people recognize that people matter, that there's a huge opportunity. I mean, but the bar is set really, really low. Most companies at this point can almost trip over success of having a better culture than their competitor, just because management just keeps finding new ways to make it worse.
But what is really crazy is that, and I mentioned a little bit in the introduction that it's not like companies are getting worse, it's that the way we feel about it, it is a little bit more sensitive. And you pointed out to the fact that during COVID, we had the time to rethink about life purpose. We had the time to think a little bit more about having a meaningful, balanced life. And this is where we have noticed that, hey, this is not right. Because I still remember the comments that I mentioned to you, and I'm probably in your experience life, you have seen these trends. It was so natural. It was a little bit like, you remember when there was this at work, people could smoke, and it was natural. And so same way, toxic behaviors, back then it was like the normality and we were accepting it because this is the way things work. But today we don't accept it, right?
Well, it's funny. I'm laughing because I think I've got a few years on you, maybe a few decades. So I've been around for a while. But when you talk about smoking in the office, which is somewhat recent, or going in the restaurants and bars and wherever you went, think about smoking in hospital rooms.
Yeah.
I mean, doctors used to come in with a cigarette in their hand with oxygen there, or in an airplane. And they get, younger people, and when I say that, it's probably people born within the last 30, 40 years, haven't experienced that, but yeah, it was pretty bizarre, but that was normal behavior back then. But so we're learning the new ways, and some of the ways that we found that we're still struggling with and experimenting with, and there was a great opportunity going back to 2020, 2021. Companies were trying to reevaluate, where they were. But let's just go back, because it's almost 3 years now. It's almost exactly 3 years ago, as we're recording this, that we went into lockdown. And completely globally, I mean, to imagine that we would go into a global lockdown, quarantine. People couldn't go out of their homes. They couldn't go to restaurants. Businesses were shut down, couldn't cross borders, couldn't do all that stuff. And so we spent a lot of time on Zoom and Teams and calls just like this. But it gave us an opportunity, especially for consultants and people who were really focused on this, to hear from people that we usually couldn't hear from, CEOs, of organizations, senior leaders, that were willing to share what their experience was. And they became incredibly vulnerable. I can't say they became, but they showed their vulnerability. They showed their authenticity. The world became transparent. I mean, I remember being on calls with CEOs of Clorox and some companies that were completely disrupted, because everybody needed disinfectant, but also companies that shut down. And there was I'm just drawing a blank on what his name was, but he was one of the commanders from Afghanistan, a retired general, and talked about deployment and logistics, and he was talking about the supply chain. And while they were on the call, what would have been completely inappropriate, let's say, before this, that all of a sudden in the middle of a call, a cat jumps up on the desk, a dog comes up, a grandchild comes into the room, they pick them up and go, oh, hey, meet my granddaughter, or greet my grandson, Walker or Waylon or Janie or Susie, and puts them on and say hi to the crowd. And a month before that, that would have been completely inappropriate, and the meetings would have never been remote. But all of a sudden, people started to share their vulnerability. You saw what it was like to look inside how they lived, what their life was, and that they actually weren't just a CEO. It wasn't a person in an ivory tower, but they were people with family. And you saw another side, and vice versa. It gave senior leaders an opportunity to see how people were living and what it was like to live in a studio apartment, 700 square feet with 3 roommates, and all scrambling to do that. So it was like, thank goodness we finally kind of broke through the world, and we had this level of transparency and authenticity and vulnerability. And we talked about it for years, and we're going to get it. And then as soon as the call went back to work, and then you look 2 years later or 3 years later, everybody has to come back into the office. And the office before wasn't that good. People showed up, but when you look at Gallup's, many people are familiar with Gallup's survey, and this is worldwide, Gallup's engagement survey. It really is, for 30 to 40 years, the level of engagement within organizations has been about 30%. And only 30% of the 3 out of 10 employees were engaged. 70% were disengaged. And we're not talking, a little unhappy. No, we're talking disengaged. 70% are disengaged. So that's the world. That was the normal we wanted to go back to. And what they broke through was, wow, we can have vulnerability and authenticity and transparency. Let's either continue that, or if we bring people back to the workplace, back to the office, how can we continue that rather than just going back to that same, corporate living, having 5, 10, or 50 floors, Management was separated. They might have even been in a different building, and they blew it. They completely blew it. And so now there's this raging battle, and this fits into our conversation about culture, about having a toxic culture versus a thriving culture. Is you can't have a thriving culture or a good culture just by bringing people back to work who also resent the fact that they have to come back to work. They resent the fact that they're going to have to fight commuting, because now maybe their lives are still busy and active, but they don't spend an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours every day on the road or using public transportation, however they got to work, because now they had an hour to go to the gym or spend with their kids or just lay back or walk their dog or take a hike, whatever it might be. And they go, no, you can't do that anymore. You have to be in work, and then to get back to work. And half the people are not there because some are flexible, some are on leave. And so they're in work talking to people remotely that they could do from home. Yeah. I mean, so it's just bizarre, but that's a new level of toxicity, because now people resent being there. The other part of this is it's also not only I'll go back to Gallup and then I'll shut up for a second, and I'm sure you have a couple of questions that I generated. One of the things about Gallup survey, they talked about engagement, but somewhat recently, and I don't remember the exact year, they started to measure engagement and thriving. So which is two different things. So you can have people that are engaged, but they're really thriving. And thriving they're not just workers, they're not just engaged at work, but do they feel that they're connected to work and that they're that their lives are good. They're better because they're working in this organization. So they start to measure engagement and thriving. And the numbers are abysmal. Only 9% of the working population is both engaged and thriving. 57%, almost 6 out of 10, are not engaged and not thriving. So you take that 30% number and go, well, it's increasing a little bit. So yeah, it goes up to 31, 32%. It's still bad because you have disengaged, but it's not only helping people become engaged, it's not only fixing that part, but in order to have them engaged, you have to look at the whole person. You have to look at their well-being. You have to look at what's their life like, and how can you improve that if you're going to put them back on the road for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours every day, and bring them back into an environment that really wasn't fixed before, and now you have all this controversy. So it's really complicated. And just one more thing on this. When they break down the thriving part, Gallup also does a global emotions report, and they looked at they look at 10 factors. And hope I sometimes remember all of them, but they look at things like, on a positive side, did you experience joy yesterday? Did you experience any joy? Did you feel respected yesterday? Did you learn something yesterday? So that's 3 out of the 5. And then they look at the negative side. What negative emotions did you experience? And the negative emotions is, were you sad yesterday? Were you worried yesterday? Were you angry yesterday? Were you in physical pain yesterday? So pretty simple stuff. When they put the scores together, they found that if you scored, if all 5 of the negative emotions, you said, yes, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm worried, I'm stressed, and I'm in pain. 1/5 of the workforce, 19% worldwide, said that they could check off all those boxes. So not only is 70% of the workforce disengaged, is 57% are not thriving as well, but 19% are miserable and lonely. And you go, okay, so we're bringing these people back. The opportunity is enormous to give them a place that they want to go, or giving them an organization. And I want to say a place, creating a culture that allows them to become engaged, to feel like they matter, to thrive. And I mean, we're literally handing an opportunity to every business in the world to be able to do this. And they go, that sounds complicated. No, we're just going to bring everybody back to work.
Ira, so what is really crazy on what you're saying is the lack of understanding of human needs, in fact, because you made good to differentiate this story about engagement and thriving, because in order to thrive, we need to have a kind of a sense of autonomy, so that we have the choice that if we want, we can go back to the office, or we can stay at home because we do certain activities better at home, and we can balance a little bit more our lives. And that comes to the point of pointing out this department or these people who was so hated just before COVID, human resources people, right? Because they became like a machine, a production machine of paper, and the human side of these guys from human resource was not so many people were quite positive about the outcomes that they were producing. According to you, this is HR today fulfilling this human side in human resources, or have they improved really? Have they become a little bit more key in order to transform? And by the way, is these human resources people are the ones who have, half of them have a degree in psychology, and they should be understanding human beings. Do they today understand a little bit more human beings?
I don't want to slight my HR friends.
I knew that you were going to say that.
Because their intentions are incredible. They're compassionate. You're right. Some have psychology degrees, some don't. Some are just genuinely nice people. Some came from different worlds. They came from business, marketing, sales, and moved into HR. Other people came more traditional routes. But I would say that most people that are in HR, and again, I've spoken at small meetings and I've spoken, to the annual meetings where there's, tens of thousands of people there. And the result is, they have good intentions. They're good people. But the outcomes, just having good intentions doesn't mean that you can, turn this ship around on a dime. It takes time. It's complicated. And HR, it's beyond complicated. It's complex. That there's a lot of moving parts. If you squeeze, it's like a balloon. If you squeeze this part, another part bulges out. It's like whack-a-mole, even more than a balloon. Things keep popping up. It's incredibly complicated. Just talking about HR, we talk about it as one entity. And, that goes from creating a company culture down to paying people on time. And they all have, so many variations. But getting back to your question is, where's HR in this? So the intentions are good. There's a lot of good conversations. But it's so complex, and without management, really recognizing HR. When I entered this field, it was about 30 years ago, when I changed one career and moved into it. The big conversation for years at that point, but it was really heated, was getting a seat at the table. You need to be respected. Here's the skills you need. You need to bring business acumen to the table. Here's the seat. Well, they got the seat, but it didn't mean that the other people at the table were listening. So it sort of said, yes, HR needs to be here because we need to hire people, we need to retain people, we need bigger strategies, and companies got larger and all those things. So people strategy became a really key component of it. But when it came down to the really crucial decisions, nobody listened, and they didn't have that key component. So let me give you an example. I just saw it, it was today or yesterday. It's like, okay, Facebook, Meta, just laid off another 10,000 people. So companies are just randomly, either saying everybody needs to come back to work, doesn't matter what your feelings are, what your circumstances are, or you're just getting laid off. Okay, understands companies need to lay off people. But I'd really wonder how much HR had a role in determining the future of the workforce in doing that. By laying off 10 or 15 or 20,000 people, what's their future look like? How are they going to recruit? How are they going to retain? What, you know, there's a lot of good research that shows that every time a company, that laying off people in the long run never creates the ROI that was expected. And it, again, just repeating something and repeating. So yes, the tech sector is down worldwide. It's being disrupted. There's things, you know, AI is advanced with things like ChatGPT is now in everybody's hands. So there's all these things going on and go, listen, the strategy that we had in place last year or for the last few years is no longer valid. We need to restructure. And maybe some of the people that we have aren't the right people. We're going to have new products, new services. Get it. But I still don't see where, and I don't know this personally, but I don't know the role that HR played in that. Now, I do know in a lot of smaller and medium-sized companies, where especially privately owned companies, where HR becomes, hey, we need to make a decision that we're going to lay off X number of people, and so you go execute it. You make sure everybody's notified, make sure all the paperwork, the regulations, you know, that we're in compliance. But layoffs become a cost-cutting administrative compliance issue. And it's still detached from the future. And then when the economy rebounds and the company needs people back again, they call in HR and go, oh, hey, forget all that compliance regulation stuff. We got good news. We're going to hire again. And then you go back to the market, and there is no market because labor shortages, the labor market, you know, I've been talking about this for 25 years, the perfect labor storm. There's just, and especially in the US, I know that market better than most, there's just not enough people that have the skills. So we have the lowest working age population in relationship to under 18 and over 65 in our history. And it's not going to get any better over the next few years, especially without immigration. And at least in the US, immigration is not going to happen because it's too politically volatile to make that happen. So we have a shrinking population. The lifespan of a skill that people need is less than 5 years now. So the new skills, and even if you have the skill today, you didn't have it. There was a recent study by Burning Glass Institute and Wiley and a few other organizations, and they determined that I got to get the numbers right. 37% of the skills of the average U.S. worker have changed in the last 5 years. So one third of the skills have changed. And for higher tech jobs and more complex roles, 75% of the skills that were required 5 years ago have changed today. So in addition to not having the bodies, they don't have the skills. And depending on which industry, it's going to vary. That's the reality. And there's no quick fix. If we change without an immigration policy, if we fix our education system, that's going to take years for people to gain the skills, or even on short upskilling and reskilling, it could take a year or 2 or 3, depending on what it is. And, you know, if we increase our birth rates, that's at least 18 years until, unless we do it genetically and instead of growing sheep, instead of creating genetically created sheep, we have genetically created people, which isn't going to happen. There is no quick fix to this. So going back to, you know, we're not addressing, you know, we talk about how complicated when we talk about toxic culture. There's a billion reasons why, but it still doesn't seem that senior management grasps how important it is to have a company culture that people want to work for, because the simple supply and demand, there is no supply. This is a shortage that we cannot fix on the short term. Partially, some jobs will become automated. It's like, okay, we got to become more efficient, automate, get it. But now we need people, the four fastest growing jobs in the world, high demand jobs. high growth, high demand jobs. AI and machine learning. We don't have enough people that understand that. So if you're going to automate, you're going to need those people. Cloud computing, product management. And the fourth is really interesting. Social media manager is the fourth highest high demand, high growth job. So those are the four entities. And it doesn't mean just knowing how to post and like and do that. I mean, we're talking much more sophisticated plans, especially with all the platforms out there. But if those are the high demand, high growth jobs, where do we get the people in the short term? And if you automate, you automatically need the AI talent, you need the cloud computing talent, you probably need might need product management talent. And and again, just to promote the business, what you're doing and getting the messaging out, you're going to need a social media management. And that could be internal, by the way. Social media management, just not external. It's just not Facebook. It's sometimes using Slack. I mean, it's sometimes internally. How do we get engagement? How do we build that engagement with the community? So there's just this huge disconnect. And because we're talking about it here, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and you're bringing an awareness to it, it means that people are talking about it. People get it. I wouldn't be talking about it if it didn't matter. And I wouldn't be talking about it if I wasn't learning from companies that were doing it right. So it's being done well, and it's being done right, but it's not being done enough because people think that, oh, we're going to create a Facebook page to build our community. Yeah, that's like 2008 stuff.
Exactly.
That ship has sailed. Man, I mean, it has sailed. And again, there's just too much trying to fix things with technology, which I'm all for technology, and it's an incredible part. But it's no longer let's open a Slack channel. I don't know how many Slack channels that I've been invited to be on, but I can tell you I don't check a lot of them because there's only so many hours in the day, and you got to focus your time. I focus on the ones, and I participate in the ones that are valuable, not just to say, hey, if I need you in a hurry, I'm going to post something. No, text me. I'll still go back to old technology. Or better yet, pick up the phone, leave a message call me, leave a message. So there's still time to use old technology, but companies are just grasping at straws, and by doing it wrong. And I'm not saying that we don't need all these things. What happens is they do it without thinking through the experience of it. And we work with a company called Avanti. They are a cybersecurity company. It was really odd how my relationship started with them, because they reached out to me about their employee experience, and I thought it was about internal. And they're focused on the digital employee experience. They found out that 1 out of 5 workers quit because of a bad digital employee experience. And that simply is, hey, I got to work and I can't log in, or I have lousy internet, or this is too confusing, or I need help and they can't get it. Or somebody just told me to go one more channel. There's one organization that I know very well, and they decided they're going to improve their processes. They're going to organize, and they have teams. They have Asana. They have multiple. It's like every day there's another tool, and you go, oh, this will fix the problem. And fortunately, I don't have to be too involved with it, but it's driving everybody crazy because it's way too much. It's overwhelming, and people can't get their work done because it's like, where was that proposal form? And they go, oh, we moved it from this folder to that folder in this system and that system. And why don't you, if you need something, go on Slack? It's just too complicated, and say, I don't have time for this. I'm not doing my work. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go somewhere else. And it's not productive. That's going back. That's part of a toxic culture. It's not just bad bosses anymore.
Exactly. Ira, I just wanted to highlight something that has stayed with me out of this conversation. So you were mentioning about decision making of firing people, and this decision making might be sometimes a little bit like the factors, how you decide about firing people, it might be a little bit compromised. And this is where maybe the influence of toxic work cultures comes to place, because we tend to fire people who are not like us. Like, I mean, people who are might be different. So this is it would be people who belongs to small communities. So people who are different than the norm of the culture. So people with disability, people who are too old, people with certain genders. It might be people who are just not part of this place where you are constantly in competition. People who don't want to play the game of backstabbing each other because this is a competition, and so on. So there might be some areas about how human resources or management in corporations are deciding of getting rid of people that might also enhance this the workplace that is a little bit more toxic. Now, in your books, you talk a lot about agility. You talk about work cultures, and I remember somewhere I saw that this principle of shift or die that you mentioned in one of your books. I don't remember which one, by the way.
Yeah, recruiting in the age of Googlization.
Oh, okay. So how applicable is this principle about toxic cultures? So is there a way to explain that if you don't change, you are going to be out of business?
Yeah, it still holds true. I mean, it is shift or die. And now it could be a slow death. There are certain organizations, certain businesses, certain locations that you certainly can get away with it. I mean, the time span is much longer. But there's others that are, it's now. I mean, the future is now. The future is almost past. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, but shift or die isn't just an organization. I mean, it's just not an HR thing. It's not a management thing. It's not a strategic thing. It really is it's an individual. I mean, we look a lot at as individuals. How do you help people become comfortable with change? We talk about, and now the neuroscience is proving this. That I learned a term about 3 years ago. He was on from John Sinai. He was on one of our podcasts, and he talked about an addiction. He exposed me to this, and we're addicted to certainty. Humans are addicted to certainty, and it was like a catchy phrase. And I go, yeah, that makes sense. You know, people just don't like change, but it's true. There literally is. The neuroscience shows that the chemical releases and the stimulations is that we truly are when we're asked to change or do something foreign, and it could be because we don't have the confidence to do it, or we think it's a crazy idea. Whatever reason it is that the chemicals and the electrical impulses start firing all over the place in the exact same way as if we were on psychedelics or drugs. And therefore, we have this true addiction to certainty. And that's where, by continuing that, what happens with most addictions is you die. Or you have a lot of chronic, debilitating life. So there are people that are really struggling, which feeds back into the sadness and the worry and the anger and the physical. It feeds back into that, the sources that we have disengagement and lack of thriving, and so many people are miserable, can be traced back to some of the neuroscience that we're discovering. So we have this addiction to certainty. That's the opportunities. How do we create an opportunity? How can companies help people individually? One is become more adaptable, and not just for business. to thrive in life. If I've always believed, if you help people find a solution that helps them solve a personal family problem, they're indebted to you. They appreciate you. You help them find the solution to something that they thought was unsolvable or unfixable, or why would my boss care that I don't have childcare? Why would they care that I've got an older parent who needs me for caregiving, or whatever the situation might be? Is that when you provide people with the skills, not to fix it, but to manage it, and to learn to adapt and help them become better, or at least to get through it, then you create a bond that people aren't going to just leave for another $1 or 50 cents. And so there's a huge opportunity for organizations to provide some simple skill sets to people, which then in turn, indirectly, starts to fix the toxic culture, because they're less disengaged, they're less miserable, they start to have a better personal life. But it's not just fixing people, because that's what companies want to do. Companies want to fix people. Let's go, oh yeah, let's give people more grit. If they're more gritty, then they won't worry about it. They can persevere through anything. And let's teach them resilience, because they're buzzwords and they're important. But if you don't help people develop a growth mindset, then they're not going to be able to apply the grit and resilience. So the studies have shown that there's 5 dimensions that are really, really critical to helping people become more adaptable. If they're more adaptable, then they shift and not die. And if they do that, now they're engaged and thriving, which then changes your culture, because culture is only the aggregate of all the people's emotions and beliefs. That's all it is. I mean, it's simple. I mean, people say, oh, we have this company culture. It's like building a home that nobody comes to. You know, or you walk in and go, oh, I thought it would look different. Oh, I don't like the color paint. I mean, basically it's, okay, let's create an aggregate of all the people's emotions and beliefs. And no matter what the company used to think a culture was, it's now just the aggregate of all the people within there. It's the values and beliefs and behaviors of that group. So if you can change the behaviors of the people, then you basically fix, or you mitigate the toxic culture. The toxic culture is only the result of all the people. So you've got to fix that. And what they do is they say, well, let's put them in a new box, or let's dangle a new carrot in front of them, or give them we'll give them half a Friday off every 3 months. Yeah, that used to work. But it didn't change the toxic culture. It just made it tolerable that I can spend 4 less hours at work, once a quarter. And that was supposed to at least say, listen, we're going to give you a break from the toxic culture. That's it. We're not going to fix it, but we're going to give you a 4-hour break, or we'll do a 4-day work week, and you won't have to come in Fridays or stay at home. And at least we'll give you a break from our toxic culture. The reality is you need to fix the toxic culture. And one of the ways to do that is part of it is to help people deal with change better. And that goes from senior leaders down to frontline workers, okay, because everybody has a problem. The other part of that, though, is part of this model that we work with that looks at grit, resilience, growth mindset. It also looks at unlearning. How do we help people unlearn the bad behaviors, and then mental flexibility, be able to manage all this vast amount of information that we have. A lot of it's misinformation too, but how do you teach people to deal with all this cognitive dissonance? So those are the 5 adaptability skills. But you also have to look at the company culture, because management always says, let's look at a course, or let's look at a skill, and we'll buy a video series and they can watch how to grow their grit in an hour, Or we'll teach them empathy. I love this. We're going to teach people empathy by a self-study course, a video course. Yeah, okay. That's going to fix empathy. But the flip side of that is changing the culture. So the components of a culture, at least to measure, doesn't fix it, is, do the individuals feel that they have company support? Do they think that management has their back? And I'll bet you that hundreds of thousands of tech workers that are being laid off don't necessarily believe that management had their back. And they probably didn't believe they had their back when they were employed either, before the layoff. But it also looks at team support, and this goes back years. I mean, we all know that the most important ties are with your coworkers and with your manager. And people stay in companies. They may not thrive and be engaged, but at least they don't quit. If you have a good manager, if they believe that the manager and the team workers have their back. So it's company support, team support, and then you look at the work environment. What are the processes in place? That goes back to what we just talked about, the things like the technology. Do people have a good experience, right? When they come in? It's not just, oh, we'll give you a username and a password and then you're fend for yourself. Figure it out. Oh, the person who usually onboards people is off for a month on maternity leave. When they come back, they'll teach you how to use the system. Now, that doesn't cut it either. So we've got company support, team support, work environment. We also look at the emotional health. Where's their head?
Yeah.
What's their well-being? And you can't fix well-being without fixing those other things. But it's important to at least assess that. And then the final factor that we try to measure is work stress. Is the job stressful? So being a fireman, a policeman, being a politician, being a first responder, a physician, or a nurse in a trauma center. Okay, those are high stress jobs. And what can you do to mitigate that? At least not make it worse. But then you have other jobs that aren't really that stressful. I mean, there's all stress. There's just stress in all jobs. But don't make, most accounting offices probably don't have really toxic cultures. But the bar is lower. And if you make it, if you say, oh, we can get away with it because for whatever reason, people are going to leave to go to another organization but it's not inherent in an accounting job. But companies seem to say, oh, every job's stressful, and a little bit more stress won't harm anybody. Well, it does, because then that affects their health, and then it affects their well-being, and it affects their absenteeism, and the showing up, and their productivity, and their performance, and then they quiet quit, or they quit, just outright quit. Yeah, it does. It eventually is surmountable. So management still has this thing about fixing people, where the organization itself has to learn to create an environment that allows people not to shift or die. They help them shift, but then they have to create an environment that nurtures that feeds them, that supports that. And then likewise, a lot of times people have the right skills. You hire the right people. They have grit and resilience and growth mindset, and they're ready to thrive, and then they die in the environment. And we see a lot of that. I mean, we measure organizations, the individuals, and people in general have average skills to be able to adapt. They're not at a loss. They have average skills. They could improve, but they're okay. But the environment just kills it. It's like bringing. Go ahead.
So you have mentioned something that is quite interesting, because it opens the Pandora box about how organizations are creating capabilities for the people. It's about all these meta skills that you have mentioned: resilience, growth mindset. We are not doing enough, and I totally agree. We cannot learn that with a 1 hour e-learning from LinkedIn Learning. We cannot learn that with an awareness session by a coach or by a guru on resilience. So, and I have the impression that there is a huge gap in terms of how we train people to build this mental capacity and the understanding also that this is a habit creation process, so it cannot be solved with watching a movie. It has to be practiced regularly, and nobody has the time for that. So there is something to be reworked in order to create healthy, non-toxic work cultures.
Oh, you're absolutely correct, and I keep going back to growth mindset, because I don't know how. I wasn't aware of what it even was, but then I reflect on my life and see where my fixed mindset was going through school. And, I don't want to take that course because what if I get a B, or what if I look stupid? And so but growth mindset affects everything. If you don't have, it's not just having an open mind. It's having an open mind and being vulnerable, understanding that you will make mistakes while you're practicing, and you will learn from those mistakes, and creating that opportunity. So it's both helping the individual and creating an environment, helping managers and other people support that. The challenge, but the solution is, it's not like, oh, well, that seems like, I mean, how do you transform people's mind? How do you change their behaviors? How do you get inside their head? So, and this is just one example, but we created a growth mindset program, and I didn't do it. I mean, I provided the idea, the concept. And we work with an educational company that focuses on business. And it's not a matter of, oh, we have a series of videos, and it's micro learning. It's 5 minutes a day, maybe 6, maybe 7 some days. 5, 6, 7 minutes. Watch this video and think about it. Here's a question. Think about this till tomorrow. So for 22 out of 30 days, we send an email or a text, and it introduces the concept of fixed and growth mindset. Identify a behavior that here's a fixed mindset you have. Here's a time when you exhibited growth mindset. Show them videos, walk them through some of the stories. We have what we call the Yeti challenge. And a Yeti challenge is I'm not very good at math, or I'm not good at public speaking yet, which changes the whole dynamic. Yet I will do something. What's that something? And it may be speak with my manager, take a course, take time to relax, get a tutor, read a book, go back to school, whatever it might be. It's just something simple. And we don't necessarily do it to the business. We say, what's something in your life that you're not very good at, but it would help you? Even if you were average at it, it would help you. And then walk through the process of trying that. It's 5 minutes a day. By email or text, and text is obviously the most popular, that people do it. As soon as they get it, you see them stop and they read it. And we can't get organizations to adopt that.
Totally. I have the same experience, Ira. They don't get it, that it has to take time, that people has to practice to make it happen. As you say, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is, but consistency is what makes new behaviors to be created. Ira, I have one last question for you. Yes, please.
I was just going to say, just think about what we were talking about before. Sorry to interrupt, but with commuting time. So they're willing to have people spend an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours commuting every day, but not take 5 minutes.
Indeed.
I mean, that's the craziest. But this is what happens in HR, which ties into the HR question. If that came down to, listen, we have 2 ways to manufacture this piece of equipment. We can do it. We can either have people travel all around to have a 5-minute meeting, or we can do it online through text and do it 5 minutes. And the company says, no, let's have everybody travel all around. We'll bring people in. We'll have a 3-hour meeting to what we can accomplish in 5 minutes. That would never happen in sales, marketing, or operations. When it comes to HR and training and reskilling and upskilling, it doesn't happen. So that's where HR really needs to, I can't say HR needs to step up. They need to be able to somehow persuade, and hopefully we're helping people with that tool, to be able to do that. Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
Thank you. And I like that this time you open up a little bit more about the HR topic. They have become better. That I have to say, that during COVID, I saw their voices in LinkedIn. So it was a little bit more human. And some of them really unleash all their frustrations of not doing the things that they were paid to do from the human side. Ira, my question is, how does the future of the work culture looks like 10 years from now? What are the future trends that you see happening in terms of work cultures?
I'll take you to the end, and then I know we're getting late into this and we've been talking a while. I'd love to come back sometime. It's going to come down to 2 things. It's going to come down to meaningful work. that we're going to have to connect people to the roles that they have, not to the jobs. We're too associated with the job title. But what role do they play? How does that role, how does even, I heard this story from somebody just a few weeks ago, that a custodian's job isn't to clean, but it's to keep the environment safe, or to help create a safe environment and a clean environment for the other people. But it's how does that help the mission of the company? How does that help the strategy? So it's helping people connect to the role connect their roles to the overall organization. So that's the meaningful work part. But ultimately, what we're trying to achieve, and this is happening, is how do people feel that they matter at work, and that it's not just their job matters. Oh, you're really important around here. No, that they feel it. Those aren't just words. How do we connect that? And by doing those two things, creating meaningful work and mattering at work, ultimately we're improving we're taking care of people's emotions. We're starting that they still may have troubles in life, but at least that emotional stress, that there's a higher level of well-being, that they feel that they are part of a community, not a Slack channel. So it really, if we go down, where do we think we're going to be? Hopefully it's not 10 years. Hopefully it's 5, and hopefully it's a fast uptick. That we're not just going to see more talk about meaningful work, and as I said, a marketing buzz, and mattering at work, but that's the goal, that's the purpose, that's the role of what company cultures look like. That's the cure for a toxic culture, because you can't have meaningful work and people won't feel like they matter if it's toxic. It just doesn't exist. It'll just kill it. So part of it is hopefully that's the opportunity. And I will say this, it goes way beyond measuring employee engagement and employee experience. Employee experience is just the measurement of how well are we doing in helping people feel that they matter and that their job is meaningful. And sometimes some companies, some people, you can make them feel like they matter. But if their purpose and their role, their own interests and behaviors and values, they don't like what they're doing. I switched roles. It didn't matter that I was making a boatload of money, had a very lucrative career, had 2 homes, lots of cars. I mean, I was the all-American family. I had everything that everybody would want. And I hated it. That was a topic of my TED Talk. For I don't know if you knew, but for people that don't know, I mean, I was a dentist, and in my TED Talk, I said I loved everything about dentistry but dentistry. And the reality is I could walk out of that role and do exactly what I'm doing now with the same passion, with more passion. I just was doing a job. I was filling and drilling. And the fact is that I can walk out and do something else that's meaningful. So was the job what I did, was it helpful? Was it meaningful? Did I feel like I mattered? I did, but the work wasn't that meaningful to me. I mean, it just became routine. It became a job. It became a task. It just didn't connect with me. So some companies, some businesses can do everything right, but there's some people that are just going to not be good fits. But then you can help them, and you will help them find that this isn't the right organization, or it's not the right career path or the right role for you. And you can either move them around the organization, or maybe they have to leave and go someplace else. But at least you help them with the direction that they need to go. So back to what does this look like in 5 or 10 years? We're going to hear a lot about well-being. We're going to hear a lot about employee experience. We're going to hear a lot about employee engagement. If the vision isn't mattering at work and meaningful work, and I don't know quite how to completely dissociate those two, have me back in 10 years and we'll be talking about the same old thing.
Exactly. Ira, it was really lovely to speak to you. Really, I appreciate learn a couple of good today. Tell me, how can people reach you out? So we know about LinkedIn. What else?
Yeah, Yeah, I'm very, very active on LinkedIn. I'm there quite a bit. The podcast is another great way. Hopefully you'll listen to that. Geeks Geezers Googlization. We're on YouTube, and we're on all the Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, almost anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also go to my website, irawolfe.com. And if you're interested in some of the tools that I talked about or that we're using to help individuals and organizations, go to adaptabilitytoolkit.com. It's adaptabilitytoolkit.com.
Okay, I'm going to be putting these links below this video. Thank you very much, Ira. It was really, really, really nice to speak to you. Hope to see you soon. Thank you. Have a great day.